The mules are in the corral. Welcome to MuleTalk, and I'm Cindy K. Roberts, your host.
She's back, and she's at the top of her game with more sass and grit from Loveland, Colorado at the Lucky 3 Ranch. We are talking with Meredith Hodges. Meredith, welcome back.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back. We're talking about Cruppers and Breeching today?
You bet. Go with it.
Okay, well, I've had a lot of people tell me, first of all, just in training in general, especially when I was showing, that, they didn't need to go to any extent to do anything because they were only going to go trail riding. And people think, that they only need, what they think they need to use for the moment. And when they think about Cruppers and Breeching, they think about holding the saddle back. And basically that's about as far as their thinking goes. But they don't understand that, for instance, when they put a Crupper on, they say, oh, my animal doesn't like it because he's bucking with it and all of that. Well, they need to be introduced to these restraints and stuff. And some animals don't like breeching either.
Right.
But trail riding and jumping are two activities where it's absolutely essential to do core postural training with your equine to solidify the symmetrical balance when he's in motion or even when he's standing still, because they have a hard time standing still if they're not comfortable that way. And when you've got an animal and you're up on the trail and everything, you're going to need a whole lot more than just having your saddle held back. The other thing is that they make a lot of comparisons with animals' gaits, and they say that a lot of animals have rougher gaits than others. Well, yeah, they actually do, because they're in a different posture. Nobody is born with good posture, and that must be taught. And it's the same for animals as it is for people, and even dogs, cats. If you train a cat, if you can get them trained. Mine are trained, but that's okay. But I even have a cat that gets adjusted by the chiropractor, and his back is out.
Oh,
but I've
boy.
seen the difference, in the way these guys move and how they handle their bodies is so much better. And I've found that it's really important to address their core balance, and we're not talking about bulk muscle. We're talking about those elements, the muscles, obviously, the tendons, the ligaments, the soft tissue, and the cartilage in the joints, all has to be developed in a healthy way to support the bones, the skeleton. And when that is adequately supported and the animal's in balance, it's much safer on the trails. It's much safer over jumps. When I was doing combined training, for instance, people say, oh, well, you were, just doing fluff stuff, when you were out there doing it, and you were riding in an English saddle, and so the Crupper was okay, and if anything, it was a whole lot more radical than probably anything that anybody else does up on the trail, because we were going 3 miles over 20 jumps at a gallop, up and down the hills, jumping off rocks like these guys do, with a jump on the bottom of it, or a jump at the top. And yes, I was riding in an English saddle because that was the protocol, and those were the rules of the whole thing that I was doing. And I had a little trouble being perched on an English saddle doing all of that stuff. So balance became extremely important. But the other thing that I noticed was that every element, the animal being in balance, the tack and equipment being right and balanced, and me being balanced, all work together to keep all this stuff in place. And so I noticed that my animals taught me to make educated decisions with what to use, a Crupper or a Breeching or whatever, according to not only the anatomy of the person, or not the person, but the animal, but, and I found out that good conformation was really important, but the way that I was feeding them was really important, because I began to look at the way my animals looked with the feed program I was using, and when I was testing feeds, and believe me, I tested them with everything. I lost 11 animals in 10 years because they colicked and foundered and had all kinds of problems. So I was feeding half alfalfa, half grass hay, and everybody said that was the thing to do. And then I was introduced all these supplements and everything. and that was going to make them better and everything. But I started thinking about that too, and I thought, I'm losing animals, and I don't want to lose my animals anymore. I want them to be healthy, and I want them to be happy, and I want them to have that long life that people keep saying that mules can have. I've seen 52-year-old mules. I have seen other people with mules into their late 30s and 40s, but I've discovered that those animals were kind of rare. They weren't the norm.
Okay.
The norm, according to my veterinarian for equines, way back when, they were living between 15 and 20. And then with the new gentle breaking techniques and the new feeding products and all of that, they gained 5 years. So now it's from 20 to 25 is average. But what I'm seeing on an average at my ranch, now that I've tested all of these feed things, my animals are living well into their 30s. The average age for mine are between the ages of 35 or 33 and 35.
Okay.
And that's on the average. And then we even had a mini mule that lived till he was 41. So I thought, wow, we're getting somewhere here. And I started looking at the difference in the bodies of the animals and in the frequency of when the vet was coming out here for colic. And I noticed that my animals' shape was a whole lot different than it used to be. Most equines, they look like they've got a nice spine that kind of sticks up a little bit with a hay belly hanging from it. And if you don't do any exercise, it really looks like a big hay belly. But mine, when I got them on this feeding program of crimped oats mixed with shogo vitamins, mazola corn oil, and I only feed that once a day in the evenings, and then feed 3 times a day on brome and orchard grass. And when I got them all on this program, then they all started looking much more shapely in their bodies. And the most apparent thing was that now the spine didn't stick up off the torso, but it actually melded into the torso. There's no line there. There's usually a groove right along the side of the spine, and then the belly begins. But these animals began to having more contour to their torso, so where the spine is tied in and everything. The frequency of the fatty tissue kind of went away. It used to come up in blobs, mostly on the crest and on the croup. And so when they started grazing, of course, they'd start to get fat there, and their bodies would start getting out of shape. But, without a lot of exercise, just feeding this feeding program seemed to do them a lot of good. And I realized that the shogo vitamins they were getting were kind of like the one-a-day vitamins that humans have. You don't need a lot of supplements because it kind of covers across the board the normal things that they need. And then the mazola corn oil, that really takes a good care of how the fatty tissue is distributed through their bodies, and it really makes a difference in their hooves. There's a lot of hoof conditioners out there that are softening these hooves, and I see it all the time, and these hooves are not holding their shape. It's bad enough that they don't have a lot of good long ears, farriers that can balance the feet, but if the feet aren't in balance, the rest of the body is not going to be in balance. And what I'm seeing is these animals are coming up with feet that are kind of caving over, and especially in the behind, but although it still does it in the front, and you see them, they start looking pigeon-toed, and the foot's collapsing. Looks more like a club foot. And I think that is due, people want to blame it on wet environment and stuff like that, but I think it's more internal.
Okay.
And this mazola corn oil has really made a difference with my mules' feet. They no longer have stress rings on them or anything like that. I've got an excellent corrective shoer that comes out and takes care of anything and everything with my animals. He's very familiar with long hairs, and he does an excellent job. And their feet are staying nice and hard, and their bodies are staying in balance. And so you have to consider the feed. Now, the other thing that's a really big deal, you got to realize these feeds are developed in laboratories. And my testing has been done over 43 years with 32 animals of different sizes, types, and breeds, and all of that. Horses, donkeys, mules, miniatures, all of that. And it all works on all of them. And the only thing that I've had to do differently with the feed is just give them all different amounts.
Okay.
The same crimped oats mixed with Missoula corn oil and the show glow keeps them really good. And so that works really well. I tried dehydrated feeds because at one point we had a bad year and we were short on hay, so we went to hay cubes, and we had some that didn't have many teeth left because they were getting older, and we had to put them in give them soaked hay cubes with the oats mix blended and all of that kind of stuff, and we didn't have much luck with that. What we did have was we had an incidence of a lot of them were choking. And so I talked to my vet about that, and he said, when they first developed these dehydrated feeds and these pellets, he said that's when we began to see an increase in the choking in animals.
Oh, yeah.
He says, the shogo comes in pellets, but you're only feeding an ounce to the saddle mules, a quarter ounce of them to the miniatures, and 2 ounces to the drafts. So it's not like they're getting a lot of it. So you're not going to get the choke from that at that level. I thought about that, and I thought, well, that's not very good. And so what we did, too, for the animals that don't have many teeth, is we got a machine that will chop up bales of hay itself and chop it up into little tiny pieces, and we didn't really have to soak it. The other thing that pellets and dehydrated feeds do is they take the fluids out of the digestive tract. And like my vet said, you cannot put enough water on that stuff to replace the fluids in the digestive tract.
Okay.
You can give them a little bit, but think about it. You've got miles of intestines and in there, and they're just pouring fluid into that feed constantly when they're eating, and that's a lot of fluid, and you can't get that with a hose. The other things with the supplements is if you're going to feed supplements, you really ought to get a baseline on what they're lacking in their bodies.
Right.
And then you got to realize that taking a baseline on an animal, getting a lab test on a mule, is a whole lot different than what you're going to get on a horse. But they're basing the numbers on what the horses have. And what I have found is my vet, every time he did lab work on him, he'd come back and he'd go, well, this mule's anemic. And I said, so you're saying to me that all my mules are anemic? I said, do you think that might just be the numbers for a mule or a donkey? Because they are different from horses.
Yeah.
And if that keeps coming up, maybe that's the way they're supposed to be. Because they're not acting like they're sick. Your lab work is telling me that they're anemic and they should be run down, but they're not. So maybe we just need to do more research, at that end.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is if that's true, I had one of my mules on red cell for a while, and it made no difference at all in his anemia. It really didn't. We kept giving it to him anyway because he liked it, so we did it. And this is another thing. These animals will tell you what they need.
Oh, sure.
And I see a lot of discussion about salt and minerals and things like that. And they go, oh, you shouldn't feed this or you shouldn't feed that, and you should put this loose salt in their feed or feed them white salt by itself. And I have had tremendous success giving them one of those red trace mineral salt blocks and making sure that they're right next to the water tanks all the time, all around the property. And they will go to those salt blocks and lick what they need. And if they're not licking it, they probably don't need it.
There you go.
Because, these animals seem to know what they need instinctually, and they will, if you make it available, they'll do it. Now, what I was saying about the Missoula corn oil, it keeps the hair healthy. It keeps the feet ideally lubricated and hard, and it makes keeps the ideal conditioning of the digestive tract regularity, and colic disappears. I have not seen my vet in between vaccinations for 3 years.
Wow.
Nobody out of 17 animals is even having a mild colic.
Wow.
So I know this stuff is good.
Oh, sure.
You know. And what I have to say about hay, we feed the hay 3 times a day, and then when we turn them out slowly in the spring, an hour at a time for about 2 weeks. Then we up it to for a week. Then we up it to 2. Then we up it to 3. But the maximum amount of turnout time my animals have on pasture is 5 hours a day. And the rest of the time they're kept in dry lots. The donkeys don't go out on pasture at all because they can get obese in a heartbeat. But they do get to graze when I take them for a walk, you know, and they like that. But they have a dry lot turnout that's big enough so they can run and play. And as long as they've got that to do, they don't seem to get bored, you know, like so many people think they're going to be. They're not bored. Okay. They just need something to do. Right. You know, and if your fences, if you don't have wood fences and wire that they can sit on and bend and tear apart and all of that stuff, if they don't get started on these vices like cribbing and everything, then they don't do it. It's like if you present the opportunity to chew on the fence, then they'll do it.
Right.
If they present the opportunity to sit on the wire, then they'll do it. But I have spent years just making my facility equine proof because they all chew on things. You know, in doing so, my animals are a whole lot more calm that way. And so, yeah, I think stress in them is a big thing, just like it is in people, and is probably creating more maladies than we even realize. And so if you don't set it up to be bad, it won't be. So I try to stay away from any artificially produced hay. We actually grow our own hay here now because it got increasingly hard to find good grass hay that didn't have mold in it if it was the right kind of grass hay. People are not alerted to the fact that fescue grass hay is extremely dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
It has caused abortions, spontaneous abortions in pregnant mares. And if it does that, I don't think I need to go any further to say that, in general, it probably isn't very effectively healthy for any equine, pregnant or not. You know, if it's a toxic thing, just don't feed it. It's easier to go the other way and just feed something that is healthy. And then I keep all my animals in dry lots and runs. Like I said, their turnout is 5 hours a day, and that's to prevent obesity. But it also prevents problems like allergies from exposure to flies and other insects that live in these grassy pastures. You know, when you leave them out there, their exposure is a lot higher than if you just put them out for 5 hours a day. You know, and the other thing is people like to say, oh, my animals get hot in the summertime, so I want to clip them. I found that the only clipping mine ever needed really was when I was showing, and that was because the judges couldn't see their bodies. And, you know, and I didn't really feel very good about doing it, but it was the only way I was going to win the classes.
Right.
So that's more, you know, a lot of these things are done, artificial things are done for our own convenience and our own egos and stuff. And I think that the way the animal was made in the beginning is the way they're supposed to be done. Now, granted, I had to get a lot of extra equipment. I had to put blankets on my animals. I had to put fly masks on and things like that to keep the insects off of them. But once I stopped showing, I found that it was easy to just work with Mother Nature and what she gave them, and try to just kind of do that. So that I only clip bridle paths anymore, and that's just so that the tack and equipment doesn't get tangled up on their head. And then the other thing that was a big complaint was what they call jack sores on their legs, particularly on their hocks. But they can get them on their knees and stuff like that. But that's where the hair starts rubbing, and when they don't have any hair there, then they get bloody sores.
Ah.
So it's best not to do that.
Okay.
I found that if you do regular grooming once a week, you can really help their health. And when you see those kinds of sores coming up, a lot of times they're just, especially during shedding, they're going to start wearing hair off of their hips in strange places. And you go, oh, what do they got going on? And it's really not anything. It's just rubbing. It's chafing. And when we use Cruppers and Breeching, and a lot of the Breeching has a Crupper on it anyway, it can rub underneath the tail and stuff. So I put Johnson's baby oil in the manes and tails weekly to keep the skin soft, because softer skin is not going to chafe as easy. And so when you use that, then and adjust your Crupper the right way, it's less likely to rub any sores or anything like that.
Okay.
But see, it's still tied into the eating and what they're eating, because if you don't have that Missoula corn oil in their feed, then their skin is going to be a lot drier, and the baby oil by itself is not going to help. The other thing that I do too is I worm with ivermectin every other month, and a lot of people have told me, "Oh, that's overkill. That's they're going to build up a resistance to ivermectin." Ivermectin is not a drug that does that. It's a perfectly safe drug. It's been around for a very long time. It has adequately handled the worm situation by doing it regularly like that. And the reason, and we do break the cycle in November with Strongyl to take care of any other worms that the ivermectin does not address. But, when I've talked about this, people say, oh, you've got to get a fecal sample and this. And, well, I call them the fecal people. But, but what they don't realize is that if you're killing the larva in the animal, then there is nothing in the manure.
There you go.
It's not there,
Right.
And in further research with ivermectin, I suspect, from my experience, that the ivermectin is actually helping during fly season to keep the flies away from my animals.
Sure.
And I also use Farnham Tritech 14 fly spray once a week. And this last summer, it was particularly bad. The flies were really thick for a while. And so I had to spray them twice a week. But getting back to, we're talking about their hair coats and everything and helping, those hair coats keep the flies from getting too deep into their bodies and laying eggs, because they rub it off. When they go out into the pasture, they rub everything when they're rolling. They scrape their knees. They even turn their heads upside down and do their faces, in the dirt to try to wipe off the flies or anything that they've left. And so, I think that the ivermectin is actually contributing to the number of flies that even land on them. Now, I have some of them that attract flies like crazy. But just a handful in 17, just about 5 of them. I guess the flies just love them, and they gravitate towards them more than the others. And I think that has to do with their body chemistry, the way they smell, and all of that.
Well, what about their coat color? Does that have something to do with it?
I think you may be onto something there, because it seems to me that the animals with the lighter coats do attract more flies than the ones with the darker coats do. However, I've got one, and I think it might have been because she was gone for 17 years. She went to Hearts and Horses and worked there. And then when she came back here, oh, man, she was covered with flies.
They were glad to see her.
Thick. Oh, yeah, all 4 legs and under the belly.
Oh,
I mean, it looked like just a black belt of flies on all 4 of those places, or 5 of those places. And the only thing I can figure is that she didn't get wormed as regularly there as she did here when she came home. And that proved to be a pretty good assumption, because after about 3 weeks, they weren't attacking her like that anymore. And now she doesn't get them either. She's a black mule. And so she only has a few of them. But the sorrel mules and the palomino, they really do attract attract flies. The
Okay.
paints do a
Yes.
little bit more.
Yeah.
Not so much with the black ones, though. No, you're onto something there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
you got to pay attention to these kinds of things, and a lot of these exposures that these animals are kind of put in these situations we're doing it because of what we heard, because of what's being marketed and advertised and all of that, and so we do these things. And one of the most frequent thing I hear too is, oh, I can't feed my animal grass hay or I can't feed the oats because they're allergic to them.
What?
Well, where do you think these allergies are coming from?
Yeah.
You got to ask yourself that. Is it really the oats? Is it really the grass hay?
Right.
Because with 32 animals that I've never had one with allergies from this program.
There
never.
you go. Wow.
And that includes all my experience with 100 animals out in California when I worked for my mother. None of them got it from the oats mix or anything like that either. The oats, the only thing you got to worry about is make sure that what you're feeding is crimped, cracked, steamed or opened up oats, because the other ones just go right through them and have no nutritional value at all. And any irregularities in the digestive tract can cause gas, which can lead to twists and colic and founder, and like I said, even allergies. But we haven't had any of that problem since we've been on this diet, and done this. And even without exercise, their body took a completely different shape. And that's also why I do not condone taking and using other kinds of treats besides crimped oats without the vitamins in them. I just put them in a fanny pack and carry them around my waist, and that's their number one go-to anyway. They'll come off a pasture for oats. They love crimped oats. And so they will just turn themselves inside out for you. And it's a great reward for them. You just make sure that you're rewarding and not just handing out treats, because they know how to tap you for that, too.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So they need to know that they have to be good for that, And so that's how I kind of developed the food part of this whole thing. The other thing you need to consider, too, is that all the organs in the body are working. And when something in the intestines gets obstructed, it obstructs all the other organs in the body, too.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
So they need this to keep everything flowing well, and this keeps energy and blood circulation going, which has a lot to do with how they're going to perform. A lot of people think that they're just being lazy, and oh yeah, this is just a slow meal, but it could be that they're just really uncomfortable in their body.
Right.
And
right.
when the organs are not functioning, those aren't things you can definitely see. But when they're being fed properly, everything works. They actually feel good, which can often scare people, because then they start thinking the way they do about being a hard animal to handle. I just saw a thing up on Facebook. Somebody wrote a thing about how thoroughbreds are going to kick you. It was a farrier. The thoroughbreds are more likely to kick you. The Arabs will kick you. Quarter horses and mules will kick you, but not as energetically. And I thought, you know what?
Okay.
There's a whole lot of generalizations right there.
There you go.
There's a lot of people that will chew your head off, man.
Yeah.
And then there's those that won't.
Right.
And it matters.
And that person's an expert too, right?
Right.
They call themselves an expert.
He probably thinks so, but a lot of people think that they're experts before they learn.
Right.
And they don't realize that learning is an ongoing experience, and, a lot of those things may be proven
there you
not
go.
so true if you use another approach.
Right.
And I mean, generally speaking, any kind of resistance that the animals are giving you, they're just talking in the only way they know how.
Right.
And it's up to you to figure out where it's running amok.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of people do start talking about, oh, well, my animal's acting sore, so, my saddle must be rubbing in the wrong place and everything, and I got to maybe get a new saddle. Well, there's a lot of people out there marketing saddles and all kinds of other type of equipment. And boy, there's a load of restraints out there. And I developed the elbow pull because it only prevents the animal from raising their head too high and getting in the wrong kind of posture and hollowing their neck and their back. But I do see the value in them being able to move in every other position, so that their bodies can stay in good posture and climb in good posture up a hill, or move out, if they're in harness or even under saddle on flat ground, so that they can really pull their hindquarters underneath them and arc their spines so that they can slide into a really good reining stop. Their body has to be free to move like that. And the elbow pull that I have, that's what it does. People look at it and they go, oh, it's like draw reins, it's holding their head down. No, it's just keeping them from holding their head so high that they hollow their neck and their back. But they can go up as high, even past their withers in height. They can put their nose all the way to the ground. They can go 180 degrees plus to side to side. And so it gives them complete freedom of motion. And when you're talking about any of your talking equipment, that's what you really need to look at first. Because if you're up on that trail and you're going up and down hills and jumping off of rocks and into a gorge and coming up the other side and going into some of these really crazy places in the mountains, that animal needs to be able to balance its body and be strong in that, especially with you on top. And so the equipment needs to fit the animal's body like a glove.
Oh, yeah.
And this is what I've discovered, that when I place my saddle, it needs to be in the middle of the torso. I can't tell you how many people have their saddles, even if it's just a little bit too far forward. If the saddle is too far forward, you run the risk of rubbing on the top of the shoulder, at the point of the shoulder. Your girth will be coming into the sensitive area right behind the forearm, where the skin is really thin there. But if you put your saddle, and say we have a double-rigged Western saddle, and we put it right in the middle of the torso, then the girth is going to hang down, and that's where it's going to hang down, where the body starts to swell and the skin gets thicker. And so that's where you want it to be. You bring your girth around there, and I use string girths because they, not so much the nylon. I try to stick with the cottons, the cotton string girths, because I found, too, that artificial tack-in equipment,
like neoprene. Yeah.
Like neoprene and like nylon, those things can really rub.
So when you say string girths, are you talking like mohair and alpaca?
Well, yeah, those are okay. The only one that really isn't is the nylon string girth.
Right.
Those
Okay.
will still rub, but the rest of them are configured, with those little ropes all together, So they tend to kind of spread when they breathe, and just kind of give the animal airflow through there. And the other thing is adjustment is really important. Your front girth does need to be tight to hold the saddle down into position, but the saddle needs to fit too.
Sure.
And so a lot of the saddles that I'm seeing, especially the ones I'm seeing that have what they call mule bars and they're mule saddles, is the point of pressure is a strip parallel on each side of the animal. And I guess they're trying to follow that groove that's on either side of the spine, that, they see the animal with the spine sticking up and the hay belly, hanging from it. And then they want to fill that space. But the other thing that I found is when I sat on a horse bareback, right there behind the withers, my legs fell into a groove. And on the mules, there's a muscle there. And it made my legs stick out like it was trying to be wrapped around a hay belly, but I couldn't get a grip. When the animal started to move, my body rocked really bad, and it really offset my balance. And so I figured out that perhaps if my saddle tree didn't have the bulge in it at the gullet for the horse, if it was flatter just there, that the saddles I had from 1972, my Circle Y saddles, my Longhorn saddle, my American saddle, would fit better if I just had my saddle maker take them apart and shave that area down where that muscle is on the mule. So it would just lay flat over it instead of having a bulge against it. And it worked on all of my saddles. Now, all of my saddles fit all of my mules. And the last new saddles I bought, one was a Circle Y Western saddle, and I bought it in 94, but the other three saddles that I use all the time that fit all the mules are 1972.
Wow.
And then I also found that, of course, I had to use English saddles, and I tried to fitting all these English saddles, and the first one I got was a British brand dressage saddle, and it kind of pinched my mule in the withers a little bit, like those Western saddles did in the beginning before I had him shaved down. So I went looking for another dressage saddle, and I found that the Keeper saddles work pretty well. I just have to use a wedge pad in the front because they are kind of unbalanced for a horse who's higher in the withers. But if I put that wedge pad in there, I brought it up. But at least it was padded enough in the back. The other saddles that I used for my English stuff were Passier and Corbett used from the 70s, all-purpose saddles.
Okay.
And I used those cross-country. I used them in English classes. I even used them in the combined training dressage because they have a balanced seat on them. Yeah. But the one thing that I discovered is putting a crupper on an English saddle like that, in order for it to be really secure, first of all, you need cruppers that are made out of rolled English bridle leather. You don't want something that's made for a pack saddle.
Right.
It's too stiff, it's too wide, and if you don't keep your tack and equipment conditioned so it's pliable, elastic, and flexible, it will rub. And wherever it rubs, it's going to create sores, but even more than that, it's going to be aggravating to your equine. And he's going to pick up any kind of resistive behaviors he can to make it stop. And so you got to make sure that these things are comfortable. Well, with the English saddle, what I found was I saw a lot of other people's English saddles, and they were, telling me about this brand or that brand, but I was noticing that the back part of the saddle, where that metal T is supposed to go in to attach your crupper to, they weren't padded enough.
Oh.
Now, I kind of attribute that to modern America uses less material, therefore it's cheaper to make, therefore the profit margins are higher. But I notice the saddles that I have plenty of padding back there, because when you put that metal T in there and then you sit on that saddle, the back of the saddle takes the T down, and the part that the crupper's attached to is very stiff, and it can go right into their spine if that padding isn't thick enough to hold it up off their back.
Ouch.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
But that's something a lot of people wouldn't even think about.
Ah.
So you got to think about those things when you're evaluating your tack and equipment. And like I said, you got to take care of your tack and equipment, because the other thing is my saddles still today, my Western saddles and my English saddles, look almost brand new, because we do oil all the tack and lubricate the tack and clean the tack every time we use it, and it gets all the tack in my tack room gets done once a month with the Leather New is what we use on it, and that includes, oh my God, I don't know, it's 4 sets of mini harness, draft harness, one single set of draft harness, 2 sets of saddle mule harness, and that's not even counting I think there's like 30 bridles in there, if not more. But even though we're not using them very much anymore, we clean it all the time.
Oh, you bet.
And I just used my pack saddles that I had in a box for a while. I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to use it, but we had a shoot in our old Western town, and we wanted to do it with people. And then we thought, well, we'll just pack the standard donkey and the mini donkey. And so I pulled out my standard donkey pack saddle and the mini donkey pack saddle, and this guy made them for my mother at her ranch 50 years ago, and that stuff was so stiff. But by the time we got done with it, it had been stored good enough so that the leather was stiff, but it was still in good conditioning. No cracks in it or anything. And when we went over it with the conditioner, it looked brand new in the pictures. I think you've seen the pictures of the donkeys in that tack.
Oh, yeah.
But
yeah.
Everything in my tack room looks brand new. It's all flexible. It's all pliable. And I think the reason that it fits so well is because it's been well cared for. And when you put any of my saddles, particularly the Western saddles on them, the pressure points underneath are, when you get on and ride, are not just those two strips on either side of the spine. I tried, but I never really got into these thicker, stiffer pads because they just don't seem to meld to the animal's body. They seem like they're perched on top, and when we're riding, it feels like the saddle is going back and forth and side to side, and not just melding and conforming to their body. And if the animal is not in good posture and condition that way with good core strength, then he also has a body that perpetuates more saddle motion, whether it be back and forth or front to back and sliding, and this can be a problem. But my saddles sit right into my animals' bodies, and when they're moving, like when I'm lunging them, I can watch them and see that those saddles do not move any other way but the way that the animals are moving. So it's real comfortable, for them, and so that tells me I got two elements that are, for balance and harmony that are fitting together when I've got that all right, and then I notice too, okay, if I'm putting the saddle over the center of gravity and it's conformed to the animal's body and the crupper is attached snugly across the croup under the tail so it doesn't pull the tail up. There's a concern about having the crupper break the tail. If it's English bridle leather and you're going up and down really steep hills or anything, that crupper should break before the tail does.
Oh,
the tail,
sure.
The tail at that point where that crupper goes underneath is really strong, but they have to be able to hold their tail down in a relaxed position. When you adjust it, it needs to be not too tight that it pulls that tail up even a little bit.
Mm.
You need to use your baby oil when you're grooming so that there's no skin being chafed there and causing any kind of aggravation to make them squish their tail.
All right.
The crupper cannot have buckles down by the tail because that is a risk too. If they're going up and down a hill and the crupper's too tight and there's buckles on it and they swish their tail up into that crupper and it gets caught, you got to realize that they balance with their head and their neck, and they also balance with their tail. So when they're going up and down hills, they need to be able to have the tail in line with the neck. And if it's cranked off to the side, it throws them off balance. It makes them lean too far one way or the other. Then they have an unbalanced rider up there that, complicates the whole thing, throws them off balance. They trip, they fall, they roll, they break their tail.
Oh,
that is how they can break their tail.
Right.
And not only that, with that all out of alignment, one of the things that I do not like about breeching, now breeching is really good for an inanimate load. For pack, that's what it was originally designed for.
Okay.
It wasn't designed to go with a saddle, necessarily. You can use one. If you really want to use it, go ahead, fine, use it. You got to realize what the implications are when you use that. Most breeching does have a crupper attachment to it, guaranteed. But, again, you come back to adjustment. If you adjust the crupper too tight, it's going to pull that tail up. And you don't want to do that. If you have your saddle out of position to start with and you don't put it in the middle of the torso, then when you're going up and down hills, that crupper is going to become loose. And when it becomes loose, it starts to pull the tail sideways. It doesn't stay in line with the neck, And then those straps that come up, the breeching behind the hindquarters and all the straps that come off of that to hold it, you supposedly hold your saddle in position, that's just that many more straps. to go loose and rub.
Sure.
And aggravate your animal. And the most, the thing that I don't like the most about breeching is that even if you get it tight enough to hold the saddle in place, it might help going downhill. And even if your saddle's in position, it might help going downhill. That breeching that's on there behind their hindquarters is going to be tight. It's going to hold it back and keep the saddle from going over their withers. But if you turn around and go up the hill, this is when it gets dangerous. Because if you've got it tight, the breeching tight enough to hold the saddle back, it's restricting the hindquarter joints, the hips, from fully extending. They can only extend it as far as that breeching will allow them. If they're in a crupper, they have full extension motion in their hip joints. They can extend it all the way. And if you can envision this going up a hill, and it's a steep hill, and they're trying to find their footing with their hindquarters, they're practically climbing with their front quarters. And that means that they really have to stretch out and get everything in line. And if their hindquarters are restricted, that means that their hip joints can't fully extend, which means they'll be flat-footed behind and not be able to extend that hind foot far enough to stick a toe in there to give a push forward, that extra push uphill that they need. And if they can't do that, it's keeping that hindquarter too far underneath. It's not really underneath the hip. It's out behind it, but not as far as it could be. And what can happen is a misstep, a rollback over the heel, which will tumble you backwards, and your animal can land right on top of you.
Oh my gosh!
Can you visualize that? But this is the most dangerous thing that I see with breeching, and it's not just the animal being sore. You come back with broken arms and broken legs if they fall.
Oh right.
And so you really want to set them up for success. And that is number one with your tack and equipment. Right now they're saying, if you want to keep the saddle back, just take your back cinch and put it around right in front of the flanks, the narrow part there at the end of the bulge through the torso. They don't even think about what that does. I mean, I've got a skeleton here. Rock is turning out to be a wonderful teaching tool.
Right.
But you can see that, when we put the saddle over his skeleton, that where the back girth falls is straight down perpendicular to the ground.
Okay.
And that's where it needs to be snug but not tight. The only job that back girth has is to hold the back of the saddle down and in place, which helps for the compression and conformity of the Western saddle and distributes the weight across the whole saddle. And when you use pads like I do, the Navajo pads that aren't stiff like those other pads, it will meld into their bodies, and the more connection that it has with their body over a longer, more of a surface, the less the chance of shifting and moving. That whole thing is going to be lessened. The front girth is tight. The back girth holds the saddle down against their bodies and melds to it, so that there's compression throughout the whole thing and gives a whole lot more stability to the whole rigging, there. But the other thing that's really important too is when you take those girths and you take them up in front of the flanks, now you've got more pull from that girth away when you're going downhill, and you're going to be putting pressure on those tiny, tiny undercarriage rib bones. And they're really kind of narrow up in that spot. But where the back cinch naturally hangs at a perpendicular angle, those bones are a whole lot thicker and can take a whole lot more pressure. So, if you broke a rib, how the heck do you think you'd feel?
Oh my gosh.
And these guys, here they are putting the girths on these guys, and they say, it doesn't hurt. Well, how do you know that one of those tiny little toothpick width bones hasn't fractured?
Uh-huh. Wow.
You don't know unless you go take an x-ray. But I felt my animals are all happy to go wherever, and we do tests, to make sure that the tacking equipment works. And I often say that you should really go ahead and get it all adjusted in the beginning, put the saddle in the middle, and tighten your girths. The way I say is tighter in front, but not too tight. If it's too tight, it's going to rub. It's going to make the saddle go back and forth from side to side, and that's going to create rubbing. If it's snug, it'll just simply hold that saddle in position, as will the back cinch, as will with the help of the cripper. And like we were talking, those artificial materials that they often make, Cruppers and girths and breeching and everything from, like biothane and nylon and those kinds of things, they don't breathe like leather does.
Right.
Leather, if it's not meant to be a hard saddle leather, and even good quality saddle leather, if it's cured properly, will stay flexible and elastic and will be able to meld to the animal's body. But there's a lot of Mexican leather that is cured in urine, and that gets hard and stiff, and it doesn't really get elastic or anything. But when you have really good leather, then what you want to do is you get everything in position and get it all adjusted, and then go ahead and ride for about 15 minutes or so and get off and do it again, because the heat of the animal's body will warm up the leather, and when the leather gets warmed up, it will stretch a little.
Right.
It won't stretch a lot unless it's really cheap leather.
Right.
But it will stretch a little, and then you just readjust it. And then you're pretty good to go. If the animal's heated up, the leather's heated up, and everything is stretched where it's going to go, and you've got it adjusted, then you're good to go. The other thing that I really like to do, too, is to make sure that front girth is in the right place. I go ahead and tighten it up a little bit, and I will tighten up that girth 3 or 4 times. During, my adjustment period. After 15 minutes, well, actually, when I'm saddling, I'll do two adjustments of that girth before I even get on.
Right.
And one of the things that I like to do is I taught my animals to stretch their front legs forward. And when I do that, it pulls all the hair out from underneath and the skin out from underneath that girth, so nothing is bunched up under there to get pinched or anything. But you got to be careful when you're asking them to stretch that you don't pull on their legs. You lift the front leg and put it in the palm of your hand, and you tell them, okay, now stretch. And I'll just hold it until he stretches it. And if he's not trying to stretch it, probably he doesn't have a very good elasticity in his tendons, although he will get more elasticity with the core strength. And you might have to just tap him on the knee to encourage him to straighten that knee and stretch. But that's all you need to do. Do not pull. Just put the hoof in your hand and tap on that knee, and he'll get what you're saying. He'll go, oh, okay, and he'll just lock. It's not really locking the knee, but he'll stretch it straight. And then he'll have to pull it back because the tendon is not elastic to hold it there yet.
Yeah.
Not until you've done it quite a bit. But what that does is, like I said, is it pulls all that skin out straight underneath that girth. And then after you've done that, then you just go around and tighten that girth one more time. And then go on and ride for a while and then tighten it one more time after it heats up. But see, this is the way that you can go ahead and get your animal comfortable in his equipment. And then in order for him to stay that way, sorry folks, you can't just plop yourself up on top of the saddle and expect it to carry you.
Right.
You have to learn to move with the movement of the equipment of the mule, which you've now got in harmony.
Right.
Now it's just a matter of you getting your body in harmony. And this is why that hourglass pattern, walking through it and leading them, is so important. Because when you're doing this, you are going to there is a specific way to lead them. You do not grab the lead rope under their nose, because if you do that while you're walking, you're going to be taking them off balance with every step you take, because you ever so slightly pull their head from side to side to side, and you don't notice, but they do. And what you want to do is get their head at the shoulder, take the lead rope if you're tracking left in your left hand, and have a loop across your body so that they can be responsible for their own self-carriage. And then you want to walk straight lines and gradual arcs, no abrupt things happening. And so when you start to walk on in this hourglass pattern, you go ahead and you say their name, you go walk on, and then you look down at their front feet and see what foot they're leading with, and you match them. Left to left, right to right. Left, right, left, right, left, right. And then when you're going to stop, what the other thing you're going to do is you're going to look where you're going, and you're going to point in direction of travel, which will keep them in position and discourage them from crossing over in front of you because you're pointing where you're going. And so they will follow that. And then when you want to come to a halt, you give them a heads up. You go, and whoa. And then you stop with your feet together. Then you turn to their shoulder. In between these cones, there's 4 cones in 4 corners of your arena that are far apart. There's 2 in the middle. And you're going to be doing, if you were drawing it on the ground, an hourglass shape. And you're going to stop in between those cones, and you're going to square them up. Then you're going to give them their oats reward from their fanny pack, and you're going to stand still there, and you're going to wait until they're completely finished chewing before you go on. Now, when you change, when you stop, you're going to be changing direction, and you always want yourself on the inside of the arc. So what you're going to have to do is change leading sides. And when you do that, see, there's an internal pendulum that goes on inside of these animals. And when you're going on the left arc, for instance, around to the middle gate cones from the short end, then when you stop, you're going to have to get on the other side because now you're going to go on an arc the other direction. And the inner pendulum, every time you stop from a certain direction, while you're moving, it's going back and forth and back and forth. And when you slow to stop, it stops going back and forth slowly. And when you stop, it comes to rest. When you set them up, it rests in perfect balance. And that's when the muscles are warmed up, the core muscles are starting to develop, and they are allowed to develop symmetrically around the bones.
Wow.
This is how you do it. You can't ride them into this.
Right.
This has to be done completely independent carriage for the animal. But what it subtly does for you is that you're forced to be in good posture too. You know, you keep your chin up, you're in sync with their front legs, you're walking straight lines, you're doing general curves with equal weight over your feet while they're having equal weight over their 4 feet. And you're walking in sync. You've got the same rhythm, the same cadence as you're walking and everything. You're following the front legs. And when you do that, you don't realize it, but your hips, your seat bones are following that motion. Your legs are following that motion. Your hands are following that motion. And you're preparing them to get lunged in the round pen. And the second stage of the hourglass is to go ahead and add obstacles to it because you've got core strength and balance from doing that, you know, for a period of time, 3 months, say, and then you add obstacles to it, and that adds coordination to it. So by the time 6 months is over with, you're prepared to go in the round pen and start doing the tasks in the round pen that will get you even more in sync because now your animal will lunge with equal weight over all 4 feet and not lean like a motorcycle. So he's really getting prepared to carry your body on top.
Oh, yeah.
And when you're walking with him, your body is getting used to his motion. So when you finally do get on top, it's not going to be as awkward as it would be if you just climbed on. And in the round pen, once we do the lunging and everything, too, to shorten this whole thing up, you'll do lunging for a while, and you'll put cues to him with the lunge line in the round pen so that when you get in the open, he knows he has a cue to stay on the circle and not bolt and run off. Then the other thing is you will start your ground driving on the inside of a confined round pen in a smaller area so you've got more control. And when you start ground driving him, now you're going to follow his hind legs. and his hind legs will reinforce that cadence, that rhythm of the way he moves and everything, and your hands will learn to go forward with your legs as they're walking and give to his head out front, so that when you finally get on, you've had more practice with his body movement than you even realize.
Oh, yeah.
And when you get on, your hips and legs will move with him. He has learned his rein cues, so he's not pulling against you. He will be light in the bridle. And the only thing left for him to learn is the pressure coming from your legs. When you pull right, pressure from the left leg to go right, and vice versa. And they can pick that up really fast. But the thing you have to remember when you get on is don't ride with your heels jammed into the stirrups. What you need to do is you need to learn to ride in a relaxed position that puts most of the weight on your seat bones. And when you do that, you keep your legs wrapped around his torso lightly like a hug. And then when you give him the pressure to move one way or the other, it doesn't come out of nowhere. You just put more pressure on one side to go the opposite direction. And he'll learn that, and it won't come out of nowhere, and it won't be abrupt, and it won't spook him, and it won't cause any tension that way.
Right.
And so the way that you get yourself balanced like this is not to go out and ride, but to use your round pen again. And go ahead and ride him with no stirrups and no reins, and learn to just go around. You can do it with an assistant, without his assistant, and just he's used to his verbal commands and everything. And all you need to do is to stay relaxed. And when you want him to slow down, you just sink your weight into the stirrups. But the way to do that is know where your core is. Your core is behind your belly button. So you send energy down through your legs and just let them relax around his body and just go straight down. You don't if you push forward and you don't have any stirrups, you're going to go over backwards. And so
we won't have any of that now.
No, we won't want to do that. But if you also think up from your belly button right up through the top of your head while you're moving, then you put yourself on your seat bones, and his motion will move those seat bones the way that he moves. And that's what you want, is your animal moving your seat bones, and you just staying relaxed all the way from the belly button down, all the way from the belly button up. And then while you're doing that, you do it at walk for a while, and you can put your hands out in front of you, off to the sides, put them behind your back, put them straight up over your head. And when you feel like you're pretty competent with that, close your eyes and do it.
Oh, yeah.
And you become more connected with your animal's movement. And after a while, then you start going, wow, now I have all three elements connected. I've got my body, my saddle and equipment is comfortable. It's all moving together over a postural foundation that is moving symmetrically, smoothly, with fluid, and there's no such thing as an animal in good posture that has rugged gaits. They're all smooth.
That is so neat to learn about all of this. Back to the Crupper, you say the buckles should not be near the tail structure of the Crupper, but I haven't found any that weren't like that.
Driving Essentials has one.
Okay, that's good to know.
And actually, I think theirs might even have a tiny buckle that's only on one side for convenience.
Okay.
I think that might be okay because it's not a buckle that they're going to get their tail caught up in.
Okay. All right. Good
deal.
Most
of these Cruppers are made for people's convenience. Oh, gee, I can just put the Crupper back there, unbuckle it, wrap it around the tail, and
right,
do it back up. Because the really nice Cruppers have kind of I forget what kind of buckle they've got up there, and they're not even a straight belt buckle. They're more of an adjustment. I can't remember the name of the thing, but it's got the buckle part where the thing's sticking up in the middle, and you have to kind of take everything through, loosen it up, and then pull everything back tight again.
Okay.
But it's a little inconvenience, but it's best for a proper fit.
But it works, right?
It works. The thing is, too, that you can, with all of this that I do with my animals, you can go out and see that there are no chafed spots on any of my animals except during shedding season, and that's because they're rubbing it out in the out in the pen.
Okay.
But you see so many animals with white spots all over, and there's so many pack mules because of those sawbuck saddles, or pack saddles that they use, and the pressure points on those things, and all the rigging that they've got on them, and they rub. And then they also have people that are putting loads on that don't know how to balance loads.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if your animals have any white spots on them or any sore spots on them anywhere, it's time to start checking what you're doing, because 17 animals that I have and I use do not have one speck of anything on their body. Occasionally, somebody will nip somebody else.
Right.
But even that is minimized with their good manners.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah. When I insist, when they start picking on each other, I yell at them.
I
just
bet
like they're
you
a bunch
do.
of little kids.
I
They're
bet you
just
do.
like 6-year-old children. They're going to do what they think they can do. And the other thing is that 6-year-old children also really like to please their parents. If you give them incentive to do it, they'll do it.
Right.
If you make it easy for them to do it, they'll do it.
Very good. Well, Meredith, it's really been great, and you've been so generous about your time. I want to thank you for coming on. And I know that you have a website. What is it?
My website is www.lucky3ranch.com. I also have a Facebook page, Meredith Hodges, public figure. I also have a friends page, but it's maxed out, and I post the same thing in both places, so it really doesn't matter. And if you want to contact me directly, you can go ahead and email me at Meredith, MEREDITH, at lucky3ranch.com, or you can call me directly at my 1-800-816-7566, and we answer all the calls and all the mail. So if you call and you don't get us straight up, leave a message. I will get back to you promptly, I promise.
And you also have a children's website.
Yes, that's at JasperTheMule.com. There's stuff on there for the kids. Lots of games, lots of educational stuff, music videos, all kinds of stuff, coloring pages.
Oh, wow. That is so cool. Well, Meredith, thanks again. We will have you back on.
Sounds good. My pleasure.
All right.
Central States Horseman Magazine is your news source for what's going on in the horse and mule world. Get training tips, trail ride information, nutrition, and care articles. To get your online copy, go to centralstateshorseman.com. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or sponsor, send me an email.
everycowgirlsdream@gmail.com.
Gotta go. My mule is looking for me.
MuleTalk is an Every Cowgirl's Dream production.